So Dr. Matt Fry is the rodent and structural pest management specialist with the IPM program. He provides education and conducts research on pests that occur, oh my gosh, in and around buildings where people live, work, and play. Matt is also known as one of the famous rodentologists here in North America. And I'm going to hand it on. Rodentology.
Thank you, Jody. So, for my presentation today, I wanted to first talk about the issue that I see when it comes to creating habitat for pests immediately around your home. There's a lot of benefits to these plantings. Having plants that are right outside is that first, it provides aesthetic beauty, whether it's these flowering plants, as Barb mentioned, maybe there's different textures, growth forms that add a lot of complexity to your environment. It could be a sense of enjoyment for you to go out there and plant. It could help with privacy. Some people use plantings to create a private space in their yard. And of course, there's environmental benefits to having these plants. Maybe we're growing native plants that support the insects, that support the birds. Maybe we're taking up water from that environment so that we are not creating moisture immediately around the home. But it does create critter habitat. So it could put critters immediately next to our buildings where we're living or our working buildings. And this could be a problem, especially for people that have a very low tolerance for uninvited guests. So Barb mentioned the spider and showed a great picture of a Dolomites fishing spider. If my wife saw that, I'd probably hear her 20 miles away screaming from that spider. So not everyone wants to see these critters in their homes. Next slide. Mulch, that area that's planted right outside the home that supports those plants is often mulched. So people may see a variety of arthropods that live there. And I want to say that this life that could be teeming right outside the home is not bad. It's not inherently bad to have all this life outside your home. In fact, it's a natural part of the ecosystem. Mulch is organic debris. It's broken down wood. And so there's a whole ecosystem of critters that break down that wood and other organic material. Could be bacteria, fungi, and actinomycetes, or it could be critters that we're more familiar with. So earthworms, mites, slugs, snails, millipedes. Each of these guys are feeding on that organic material. And then there's critters that are feeding on these other trophic levels. So that's how we get our spiders in there and our centipedes, all feeding off of that base organic material. So inherently, they're not pests. Next slide. Pest is a human concept. I wanted to just really highlight this up front because I often resort to using the word pest when I'm describing any of these things, but they're only pests because we define them as pests. They've come into our space and we call them a pest when they're just natural living organisms that happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Insects and other arthropods are really important. They're pollinators, they're biological control agents, they're decomposers, bioindicators, the base of complex food webs that filter up to feed all kinds of other life that we appreciate, and they may have intrinsic value. Importantly, that's fine. Insects are in decline. Worldwide, there's a decline in the number and diversity of insects, so anything we can do to actually promote them is great, but not right around our home, okay? So dense plantings that are close to the foundation maintain moisture, and they also provide cover for burrowing mammals, for all kinds of insects and arthropods. Next slide. Critters explore and make their way indoors. So that is the natural consequence of us putting these plants and other structural habitat right outside our homes or buildings. You can advance through several clicks. So what we'll do today is we'll talk about some of the common pests that walk in. We'll go over how to inspect for entry points so that we can identify where the pest issue is, where it's originating from, and how they're getting inside. Types of openings that you might need to seal, and then some how-tos on how you can effectively seal those openings with the right materials. I guess it's going to work sometimes. So the first group that we'll talk about, and this is probably the biggest sort of catch-all for the critters that are coming inside, is going to be the occasional invaders. These tend to be soil-dwelling arthropods that make their way inside accidentally or occasionally. This happens when the outdoor environment becomes too hot, too cold, too wet, or too dry. So basically any extreme is going to cause these guys to come indoors. So if you have worked with a pest management professional or you have pest management, you might see an insect glue board near a doorway. And if they're catching all of these sort of occasional invaders, that's a key indication that you have an entry point for all of them to come in. So these critters aren't just appearing out of nowhere. They're not spontaneously generating in your buildings. They are literally walking in the front door in many cases. This includes insects like springtails, pillbugs, spiders, centipedes, ants, and ground beetles. The other critters that we'll see indoors are rodents, and they're coming in for a totally different reason. We have two different mouse species that may be found indoors, the house mouse and Peromyscus mice. And if you're very unfortunate, you may have rats that have either found a way in or chewed their way into your structures. So why do rodents enter? It's not just an occasional reason. They didn't just happen to walk through that front door. Rodents enter because as they are navigating and foraging their environment, they are detecting air currents and odors that are found throughout the environment. So imagine a rodent walking along this wall, taking that turn, and then right under that door, there's some cool, refreshing air coming out of that space. That would be very attractive for a rodent to then stick their head underneath and explore. If there's food odors coming out of a structure, that would also be attractive. So anything seasonal or food-oriented would attract them indoors. And I use these two pictures because we may look at a door and think, that's sealed, that's tight, critters aren't going to come in. But when we look closer, and we'll talk about measuring openings that allow pests to come in, that gap where light is coming through could be enough to allow a mouse to enter your home or facility. So I mentioned that we have two mice that can enter buildings, and there is an important reason to differentiate which mice you have. Does anybody know which one this is? House mouse. Excellent. And the one on the left? Field mouse, deer mouse, Peromyscus mouse, white-footed mouse. Excellent. I guess now you have to click. The second we get complacent, it doesn't work. So the way we can easily distinguish them is that the Peromyscus mice have a white belly. Their back fur may be black. It may be this tawny brown color. It could be a lighter brown, but their belly is always white. And this mouse is one that exclusively spends time outdoors most of the year, and then in the fall through the spring will enter facilities and nest indoors. So if you're seeing that mouse with the white belly indoors, you know that you have an entry point allowing them to come inside. Now, the house mouse can be found in residential homes, especially standalone homes, but more commonly they're found in commercial buildings like department stores, malls such as this, multifamily housing, grocery stores where they're brought in on packaging. They may be on a shipment that's on a tractor trailer. They're brought in, and once they get inside, they never leave. So finding that critter inside doesn't necessarily mean you have an exclusion issue. It means that they were introduced, and now they can move freely throughout the entire building. So when we think about the different critters that occur in buildings, we want to first think about, is this an introduction? Is this a few individuals that were just recently introduced? Or are you seeing an infestation? Because your response to that issue is going to differ if it's something that's actively reproducing in your structure versus something that just happened to make its way indoors. So one thing that we suggest doing is a perimeter inspection. And you could do this 1 to 2 times per year. I often recommend spring after the winter time when there could be freezing and thawing damage, when things could have shifted, and then in late summer before that fall period when things might enter your home. And what we're doing is just simply looking for openings. So it's a very simple process, just something that people don't add to their calendar and don't regularly do. So the process here is that you want to start and end at exactly the same place, making sure that you see the entire perimeter. Now, you could probably tell from this structure here that there's actually space underneath that location. So your inspection would have to include the perimeter inside that space as well. You're not just walking on the easy parts of the home. So you take your walk around, amazing graphics here, top notch, making sure that you start and end at the same place and you're keeping contact with the walls or the foundation the entire time. As you're searching, you're looking for potential openings. So in this example, you could see where this vent is present, that there is missing screen here, likely from mice chewing that screen and making their way indoors. Now, we have a bunch of forms on our website. I'll share this at the end of the presentation. But one thing that this form does is it helps you orient yourself to where you found that opening so that when you go back, you can figure out how to seal it with the right type of material. So you see I've drawn the perimeter of this structure, including the Bilco door, and I've noted on that map where I found openings and then what potential exclusion materials I would use to seal it. So if you want more instructions on how to do one of those inspections, these forms could be useful. When you're doing your inspection, what you want to do is think about the size openings that you found around your facility. And this is going to help, again, figure out what materials you need to use to seal that opening and tell you what kind of pests could be getting in. So if you find an opening that you can slide a credit card into, then an insect can get into that space. So all of those crawling critters can access points that are as thick as a credit card. If we find a round opening the size of a dime, then a mouse can get in. If that opening is the size of a quarter, a rat can get in. And if you can stick your fist through, then you can get larger critters like raccoons and possums. Hopefully those would be pretty obvious to you as you're doing your inspection. So I just have a quick video here. I don't think the sound is actually going to work on this, but shows you how rodents get through those very tiny openings. Oh, it is going to work. Bonus points if you know what kind of mouse that is. It's cute. It's actually a domesticated house mouse used in laboratory research or at the pet shop. Say again? Nope, this is indeed a small house mouse. It looks big in this video, but it is a house mouse.
Here's the eye, you know, that's a mouse versus a small rat, which is very small.
For the Norway rat.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so one of the things that's available in the back of the room today is a tool that can help you figure out if you have rodent entry points on your home. The one end is a small opening that would tell you that a mouse could get through, and it is a measure of the height and width of the mouse skull. And then the other side would tell you if a rat could get through. So if you could fit that, that size through an opening, then a rat could make its way either under a door or through a round opening. That tool will also give you some additional information. If you compare droppings to the end that says rat, it will tell you if there are rat droppings or mouse droppings. And then for tooth marks, you can actually differentiate rat gnawing from mouse gnawing. which is not really important when you're looking at openings, but important if you're trying to figure out what type of trap to use. So if you haven't seen droppings and you haven't seen the critter, but you see gnaw marks, then you might know that you have to select a mouse trap versus a rat trap. And now we're not advancing again. All right, so what kinds of openings need to be sealed on your structure? The first are exterior to interior entry points. And these are the most important when we're thinking about the Peromyscus mice, the rats, and those occasional invaders. And Jody found this picture, I believe it was a school?
No, this is
an apartment building. And you could see, plumbers and all kinds of contractors will drill a bigger hole so that it's easy to run pipe or electrical wires, but then never seal that opening. And this can create a runway for all kinds of pests if there's no exclusion effort on the inside of that facility. So this may be at the ground level. If you're dealing with Peromyscus mice or rats, it could be all the way up on the roof that they can climb the building and get inside. So you're looking for exterior to interior entry points. Next slide. You may also want to think about sealing potential harborage. So here, anybody have any guesses what critter made this evidence? Rats, okay? These are rat burrows. You can see this is probably the main runway here. It's very smooth. It's about 3.5 to 4 inches wide. There's another burrow here, a bolt hole or escape hole right there. Those are part of the burrow system that rats will use to escape if a predator goes into their main opening. They can quickly escape out of a covered opening at the back of the burrow. And then another burrow here. So if this is around your home or if this is around a building that you maintain, there are ways that we can prevent them or reduce their likelihood of burrowing in that location. Now, this isn't keeping pests out of the home, but this is preventing pests from moving within your home. Whether we're talking about cockroaches, bed bugs, or rodents, they may move between rooms on the same floor, or they may move vertically from floor to floor. So we want to think about closing openings that allow them to get to those spaces, whether it's utility chases or plumbing pipes underneath the sink or electrical conduit between rooms. Now, when we're doing our inspection, it's really easy to overlook the tiny openings that allow these pests to get in. So hopefully you can see this little tiny gap right there at the corner of this door. This was on a school that we were inspecting in Albany, and mice had chewed this little tiny opening and were going in and out of this front door of a school. If you're just walking by casually and you're not doing a detailed inspection, you would easily overlook this opening. That is the main entry point for that pest. So having that detail-oriented aspect when you're conducting your inspection is very important. Common issues on homes are going to be where there's basement or crawl space access, whether that's a Bilko door like this or just a cutout on the side of the structure. It's often not tight enough to keep out a lot of these pests. Entry doors for people walking into a building, as well as garage doors that fold up and down, could be entry points for pests. You can see some great landscaping there. Utility penetrations we've talked about, so where electrical wires go through, maybe other types of wires for internet cables. Anytime there's a transition between materials is also a key location for pests to get in. So the transition here between the foundation and the upper parts of the building is the sill plate, and that's going to be a key entry point for rodents and crawling insects. There's also a transition where this staircase is, and that would allow pests to get into that space as well, and potentially providing access into the home. There are also pathways that we want to consider. So rodent pests in particular are great climbers. They can get into this gap that's between the two pieces of siding and climb all the way up to second and third floor of a building. They can also wedge themselves between a downspout and the structure to shimmy all the way up a building. So really have to think about those pathways that might not be obvious when you're looking at it, but they could be a way that these pests are getting into a structure. Door corners, again, in this case, this wasn't chewed. This is just a design flaw of some doors. If you go home and you look at your front entry doors, maybe your storm door has an opening just like that, that would allow critters to come in any day of the year. And basements in particular are attractive for things like spiders because they're below ground, it's moist, and there could be water damage, there could be other issues with the structure that allow these pests to get indoors. Foundation vents and windows. In this case, this screen was torn, which would allow something even as large as a raccoon to get into that space, and gaps that are found around windows and vents allow pests to get in as well. I did want to just talk briefly about the sill plate because this is such an important component of where pests get into structures. So for most buildings, whether it's a commercial facility or your home, you'll have a foundation wall. And then on top of that is the sill plate. It's a piece of wood that runs along the top. And then the building parts or the upper parts of the building are attached to that structure. Over time, that can break down, moisture can affect that, pests can chew through that, and that ends up being a key entry point into homes that's often overlooked. When we looked at the picture that Barb showed of the siding coming down over the foundation wall, it's really hard to inspect, right? You'd have to be laying down, looking up under there, using a mirror, sticking your fingers in there, which I don't recommend. Because there could be spiders or all kinds of other critters there. Really hard to inspect, so really easy to overlook and have pests enter. Now, I know there's some folks from institutions here today, so there are some commercial deficiencies that are very common where pests can get in. Primarily main walkway doors, if there's no effective door seal. Roll-up doors as well often provide access points into structures. Loading docks, unfortunately, this is often near food preparation, so it's kind of the double whammy where you have entry points and food that's available. There's all kinds of gaps that are associated with dock levelers and the dock doors themselves. Even the pull chain that can be used to affect the height of the dock leveler can provide an access point for rodents to get into a structure. Weep holes are structures on a building that allow moisture to wick out, but if they're not sealed correctly, they can allow pests to get in, and they get in that space between the exterior facade, which in this case is brick, and the interior structure. We also can have vents that are wide open to pests if they're not louvered. So if you look closely here, you can see that there is mesh, but it's 1/2 inch mesh, which is needed so that the mechanics behind that vent can work properly, but it doesn't keep the pests out. We may also have gaps where there's spaces behind I-beams where there's deterioration of materials on the floor or deterioration of materials of the foundation. And I think the last one we'll talk about for issues are pest bridges. Jody talked about this with ants, that pest bridges provide a way for critters to get from this outside area up onto the building, and in some cases, right in through those gaps, or it could be where they get contact with the roof and have access to openings at that level. So how do we seal these openings effectively? The first thing I'll point you to is that website again that has all kinds of resources on pest exclusion. We have a section on material selection that will be useful for figuring out, will this keep out all kinds of critters or will it just keep out the crawling insects? Those inspection forms I mentioned earlier can be found here at the bottom of that page. And the URL for that website is pestexclusion.org. So the first thing that I like to orient people to is that if they have an opening that is 1 inch or less anywhere in their home, you should be able to seal it, right? It doesn't take a lot of expertise to fill a hole with something like these metal mesh fibers. or to use the correct type of elastomeric sealant to close that hole and prevent pests from getting inside. Now you'll see here that I said not steel wool. Anybody know why steel wool is not a good option for sealing these openings? It rusts, exactly. So if this material rusts, over time it's going to break down, becomes brittle, and pests can easily push it out or pull it out. I say here not caulk. Does anybody know the difference between a sealant and a caulk? This is a harder one for most audiences. So a sealant is something that's going to, an elastomeric sealant maintains its shape. It will keep contact with the surfaces over time. So if it was used around this opening, it would keep contact with the wall. If there was any movement, it would have some flexibility. Whereas the caulk that most people buy will dry out and pull away from those surfaces. So it doesn't create the long-lasting seal against those openings that we need. And then escutcheon plates are available. You can buy one that is retrofitted on, so you just loop it around the pipe, attach it to the wall, and use a sealant to keep it in place. Those can keep pests out as well. Most people can address harborage. So this may not be your ideal landscape approach. Maybe this is excessive, having so much of a barrier and no vegetation. But these vegetation-free zones can be helpful to reduce moisture on the perimeter. It can be useful to deter burrowing mammals from getting inside structures. So if you have a vegetation-free zone that is 1 inch diameter stone, 2 feet out and 6 inches deep, rats are going to have a hard time burrowing under that foundation. So that's one way to deter critters that are going to try to get under the foundation. For 1 to 4 inch openings, one of the options that is available is the use of hardware cloth. The best kind is ones that are woven. The ones that you most often see in hardware stores are going to be these ones that are welded together. If we want to exclude only rats, we're not worried about mice in that facility, we're not worried about insects, then we can use a mesh that's 1/2 inch. If we know we need to exclude mice from the facility as well, we can use 1/4 inch hardware cloth to keep out both rodents. Importantly, we want to make sure that we're fastening that to the structure appropriately. We don't want to just use staples. We want to use something like a hex head screw with washers so that rodents can't pull on that material and remove it from the structure. Another key component of keeping pests out is actually sealing those openings beneath doorways and on the side of doorways. We have a bunch of different materials that are available. One to exclude crawling insects are these high density brush sweeps. They're probably what you see most often if you walk around facilities or people's homes. They have a brush sweep on their door. This can prevent mice, but in a lot of cases, if a mouse is motivated to get through, they'll chew their way right indoors. There are rubber encased steel fabric door sweeps that have a material inside that is deterrent to rodent entry points. So as I said, brush style sweeps we saw at that school picture, but also here, rodents chewed right through it and have access to that facility. For openings that are greater than 4 inches, this is often going to require some expertise. So maybe you need someone that has skills in masonry, carpentry, or metal bending to appropriately seal these large openings. The thing that we don't want to use, especially in institutional situations, is something that is going to look aesthetically terrible and maybe not keep the pests out over time. Just a few considerations. One mistake that I see a lot of people make when they're doing exclusion, especially on their home, is that they want to make their home airtight. They think that if I'm going to keep pests out, it needs to be hermetically sealed. And that can actually lead to different issues in your home. So if you sealed a weep hole with a sealant, for example, now you're going to create moisture issues at the foundation of that structure. So we want to make sure we're selecting products that allow water to escape, that allow airflow between those structures, and exclude the pests. Another example is attic spaces. So those spaces are designed to breathe. We're supposed to allow cool air to come in the soffits and hot air to exchange out of the ridge vent or other vents. If we seal those, trying to keep pests out, we're creating moisture issues in an attic that could lead to all kinds of other issues. One component of pest management, so if you are seeing pests in your home and you do some exclusion work, the thing that you want to think about first is where are they coming in so that I can monitor that and make sure I don't seal any pests indoors. If you sealed a rodent in your home, for example, you could result in a lot more damage. They'll chew through all kinds of materials to get out. They may be found in new locations in that structure. So you want to make sure that you know where they're coming in. One way to do that is with monitoring. So here, traps were dispersed throughout this basement. We had traps on this ledge here, and we're tracking it over time. That helped us figure out where exactly the entry point was at that transition between the stairs and the foundation, which could be appropriately sealed after all the rodents had been eliminated. So two approaches that you could take. You could inspect your home and secure any openings that you find, or there's opportunities for you to just go ahead and seal this entire area and prevent any critters from now or potentially coming in using different types of products. So we have resources available on those two different approaches, the reactive approach to sealing openings, and then what kinds of things need to be sealed to prevent any entry points. Oops, I think you're just going to go click a whole bunch of times. So just what we talked about today, inspecting for entry points, prioritizing actions to exclude, to make sure we don't trap pests inside homes, selecting the right tools or materials for the job, keeping the pests out, and then doing some sort of monitoring and evaluation to make sure that we've been successful. Back one, and then so just some additional benefits besides keeping the pests out. If you do implement exclusion, it could improve the energy efficiency of the building. So if we're sealing gaps that would allow pests that are not supposed to be open, we prevent that airflow in and out of the structure. A lot of people don't want to necessarily kill pests that come into their homes. Maybe using exclusion provides a humane solution. We don't have to do any killing with pesticides or traps. We're just keeping them out. And could be environmentally beneficial if we're using fewer pesticides. The take-home message is that life finds a way. These critters will try to get indoors. That is a video. I don't know if you could just click it. So exclusion is your best chance at preventing these entry points from leading to pest issues indoors. You can see him giving you the stink eye. He's looking back at the camera. Should go to the next slide. Yeah. All right, so we'll just wrap up with one poll question here. And, oh God. All right, so after today's presentation, what will be your first response when seeing a pest at home? Do you think you'll still call a pest professional? Will you spray, bait, or trap? Figure out how they're coming in, or maybe try something else? And then you can switch to responses. Hey, all right. So some people may have changed their minds, which is excellent. All right. So next. So the last thing that I wanted to end on is just a plug for our other virtual programming. Some folks online might be aware of this already. But we do have a monthly virtual series that covers a variety of topics, some structural pests like we've covered in my presentation, but others related to gardening and anything that deals with pests around your home. So if you're interested in that, you can go to go.nysipm.org, and I know we need to update that URL. But that will bring you to a registration form, and you can register for our monthly series. And then, thank you.